Welcome, everybody. Let's let a few people pile in. We had some technical difficulties with the stream. It was set on the camera and not the Zoom, so I had to recreate a new stream. So uh, we fixed it. We fixed the problem. We have two people in. They're probably going to have to find their way in. But I put the link in the older stream so you guys can pile on over here. Anyways, welcome everybody. People long awaiting this discussion and talk, especially after the recent debate with Dr. Trent Dortry and Dr. Christopher Tomaszewski. And I'd like to welcome Dr. György Geréby, and he is a historian of medieval and late antiquity in philosophy and theology at the Central European University in Vienna. And his interests are obviously medieval philosophy and theology. But what's interesting about Dr. Geréby is that, hopefully, let me just check real quick. How you guys getting the sound okay, everybody? Can you hear us? Very low. Okay, turn it up. Higher. Sound is okay. Sometimes we have, obviously, technical issues with the sound. How about now? Better? Welcome, everybody. So we're welcoming Dr. Geréby. As I had mentioned, he is associate professor of medieval and late antiquity. Is that the proper title for that?
Late antique and medieval philosophy, but the department is called the Department of Historical Studies. So it's embedded a kind of in the form of cuckoo's egg in philosophy into the history department.
I'm going to turn this down. It says echoing a little bit. So his specialization that's relevant to this is his study in both medieval epistemology, logic, and modern as well. So it brings a really interesting perspective to all of this. I should mention that Dr. Geréby also, he was at one time a Roman Catholic who has since converted to Orthodoxy. And one of the things that Dr. Geréby and I met because I had read his paper, Theistic Fallacies, and I was really impressed. There were things that I think, intuitively, as an Orthodox, that I knew. And let's see, they're saying that your volume's a little bit. I don't know how I can control that. You want to turn your volume down just a little bit? Actually, I don't know how that works. Sometimes you can't fix these things. They're coming. If this is coming in through Zoom, I don't think it allows me different options to lower the volume for one person. Now they're saying I'm roboting.
Am I too loud or not?
You're too loud. I'm too low, and my audio is roboting.
Let me see. Yeah, but I can't do much about the.
I don't think we can do much about that.
Microphone.
Let me just see real quick.
How about this now?
Does this sound better, guys? I can listen through my phone real quick and see.
Is it any better?
It says you're 200%, I'm on 50%. It's unfortunate. Any tech savvy people in the chat can let me know how you fix something like this through Zoom. 1, 2, 3. You sound great. Let's see. Oh, wow, yeah, mine is. How about now? Better? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Right, I have an idea. It is sound a little better. Can you guys hear me now? Can you hear me now? One, two, three. Forgive me, guys. I'm gonna have to. We'll get it fixed in just a second. 1, 2, 3. I think I fixed it. All right. Robo sound went away. Fix that. The volume still, you're going to be a little bit louder, but we're just going to have to deal with that. So, anyways, welcome, Dr. Geréby. Like I said, I'd read your paper, Theistic Fallacies, that specifically deals with the issue at hand, whether, Muslims and Christians worship the same God. Well, there's some obviously implicit presuppositions in that, and theories of reference, and how reference actually even works. And so, one of the things that you lay out in your paper is what's known as the theistic fallacies. And this is when we fail to recognize the special logical and semantic character of terms like God. It results in what you identify as theistic fallacies. And you provide several kind of arguments in the paper to illustrate that. And what you show is that the erroneous presupposition also depends on what Richard Swinburne, who you spent time studying under when you were at Oxford. Richard Swinburne developed something that's called the rational core. And there's about 8 what we would identify essential properties, of which the 3 monotheistic religions, which itself, as you point out in the paper, is problematic to use the term monotheism, that doesn't come about until Henry Moore in 1680. Is it 1686? I'm trying to remember.
Yep.
And that is that there's kind of this lowest common denominator of 8 things that the 3 religions share that's enough to kind of fix the reference. But again, that has to do with, well, that might work for empirical objects, but it doesn't when you get to things like the term God. And one of those reasons is that, well, first of all, God is neither a proper name, nor is it a rigid designator. If we qualify what a rigid designator is that it picks an entity or a property out in all possible, logical possible worlds. In other words, it means the same thing for all people, which it clearly doesn't. We see in Scripture that we're referred to as gods. Do you not know that you are gods? The angelic realm is referred to as gods sometimes. There's all kinds of other gods, Thor, Odin, Zeus. They don't mean the same thing. So this ignores that fact, and I think it's more into what we want to talk about, that it's really ignoring how things like the term God work. And you'd argued in your paper, well, they operate a lot more like what's called mental objects. Now, that's not to suggest, as you point out in your paper, things that don't exist, that are phantasms or creations of the mind. I think you give several illustrations, law, Roman law, French law, games, solitaire, poker. I would probably add to uh, mathematical entities, formulas. And what's unique about mental objects, unlike empirical objects in terms of establishing reference, that, well, with empirical objects, yes, we could have two people still having the reference fixed on the same person or entity and have radical different conceptions, or what Frege calls senses, perhaps even contradictory. And the reason why we know that it can still fix on the same reference is because we can empirically investigate that. It's under certain kind of causal laws of nature, of which you can't really say if we took, for example, a mathematical formula, changing any one part of that simply because you have a lowest common kind of denominator among different people talking about a mathematics formula, that they would still be referring to the same thing. One would just be wrong. It doesn't work that way with mental objects. And one of the things that was really nice in the paper that you pointed out is that things like mental objects operate as kind of a long conjunct. And so if you know anything about logic, with conjuncts, say you have A and B and C and D, you change any one of those values, so the truth values, it changes the entire truth value for the long conjunct or short conjunct. It wouldn't matter. And if you change the truth value of it, it's obviously referring to something else. So one of the examples that I had given is, suppose somebody learns the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And then somebody else, let's say, corrupts that. They learn, well, that's not actually the Pythagorean theorem, and they subtract or take away something from the theorem. Now, we obviously see we're clearly not talking about the same, we're not referring to the same thing. And I think that's a helpful analogy with God too, is that because the term God does not operate like natural entities that are empirical, that it operates a lot more like this. So if you do change these things, you're going to change the referent. Anyways, I'm just kind of setting it up, but if you want to speak a little bit about that.
All right. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation. It's very important that when I'm not going to speak from a confessional point of view. I'm talking about the belief sentences from the philosophical point of view. So when I sort of encountered a very interesting little paralogism in a medieval logic textbook by Albert of Saxony, early 14th century. It made my mind think about the involved problems. The syllogism is very simple. It says that Aristotle believes in God. God is Trinity. Therefore, Aristotle believes in the Trinity. Now, obviously, we have a true major and a true minor premise and a false conclusion. So how come? And then the medieval logicians were very clear about that the nature of belief sentences is different from ordinary apodictic sentences. So, for example, when I say that the shop on the corner is open, it says something about me, what I believe, and not about the shop. You can say that, no, I think it's closed. It tells something about your belief. And of course, it can, but when we check and look at the actual situation, then we phrase it, the shop is open or the shop is closed. So there is no I believe in the sentence. And it's very interesting that sometimes people say, I believe, but usually this is an incomplete sentence because you believe in what? You have to specify the object of belief. And I use this sort of everyday example, but certainly when you sort of believe in something more complex, then that mental element in which characterizes your thought, that has to be spelled out. And when you spell that out, you arrive to the facets of the belief. Now, in a theological context, which came to my mind was that the most famous formula, of course, is the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed. And the creed is a long series of independent statements. The first part about the Father, the second about Christ, the third about the Holy Spirit, and then the Church, and the final things, the resurrection. But the creed is the complete conjunct of all these sentences. So, for example, and I'm obviously not going to, I will only use this as an example, but if you want to get a feel for the problem, consider the Western edition filioque, right? You add one particular sentence or clause, if you say. Functionally, it's a clause, but in fact, it's a sentence. That I believe that the Holy Spirit originates both from the Father and the Son. All right, this is the and the Son. This is the filioque. This changes the truth value of the whole creed, because in the Greek Church, the Byzantine Church, if you wish, this was not accepted because they said that it changes the meaning. And not just the meaning, but the truth value of the creed. And this was stipulated at the Council of Ephesus, that nothing can be added or distracted from the creed. Now, again, this is a complicated issue. I don't want to get into that. I choose this only as an example of how important little additions or distractions or missing elements, if you wish, are important when you characterize something you believe in. Now, to sort of to get to the point, when I say that theism is classical theism, that is let's call it the Swinburnian essential points, the essential propositions. These essential propositions are about the existence of God, omniscience, eternity, all-powerful, and a number of a relatively small set of characteristics about God. These might all be true. I'm not debating that. What I'm saying is that ordinary belief, that is Christian belief, or Islamic belief, or Jewish belief, or these are all slightly different. They are not content with this. They add a lot of things. And when, for example, the Nicene Creed speaks about the only begotten Son, and in Islam, in the Quran says that no, God doesn't have a son and doesn't beget. Two places in the Quran which specify this. You can't say that they mean the same thing, because as mental objects, they are different from each other. Now, you can say that, for example, in the case of I think it was mentioned in the previous debate, the case of Superman,
Mm-hmm.
Superman and Clark Kent. Now, how do we know that when Superman is flying, then Clark Kent is flying? We only know this because we have to know that they are identical. They are the same two names for the same person. But if you don't know that, it doesn't follow. So until astronomy proved that the morning star is the same as the evening star, you were justified to maintain that they are two different stars. So, but in the case of God, and in the case of religion, it's very, very difficult to pinpoint a natural object which would justify the truth of God being a father or not being a father. So there's no way to have an excess. You can believe, as we believe, that the beatified soul have a kind of direct awareness. Okay, in the West of the divine essence, in the East it's different. However, you can believe that, but Saint Peter will not, or Saint Paul will not come down and ascertain this in a tangible way. So it's not only a question of a simple issue of semantics, of reference. Because what I'm arguing is that in the case of belief sentences, the referent is not an external thing, it's an internal thing. It
Mm-hmm.
tells something about me and not about the objective reality. And if it's not about the objective reality, then the content of this belief, which is, as I try to show in these examples, in the Shahidah, in the case of Islam, or the creed in Christianity, or the 12 theses of Maimonides, provided you are a Maimonidean.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the content of what we entertain as our object of belief. Was it enough for a kind
Yeah,
of
it made me think
shell?
too that I can't remember if I brought this up or not in the debate, but one of the errors of the two Roman Catholic philosophers, when they were using the analogy, or Hess versus phosphorus, the reason why you could have radically different senses, and the Fregean notion of the word, is because in fact they are the same. So then it made me think about, well, isn't this a begging the question? Despite the radical differences, it's the same if and only if the two entities are the same. But without getting into the whole kind of notion of the Burlean belief condition and the nature of belief, that itself seemed like an error. That, well, you're assuming what we want to prove. That the things that they're talking about, that they are the same, but that's actually what's in question. So I wish I would have brought that up, that's question begging. The only reason why it works for the empirical examples is because they are, and then the way that we can investigate to know that they are through empirical means, through astronomy and stuff like that. So I thought that was a real problem from the get-go that they were doing, without even getting into exactly what you were saying, that then when I put this in these statements, it's referring much more to me in terms of my beliefs and how that works, rather than the thing that it's trying to refer to. So I didn't know if you had any thought about that.
Well, there is no way, I think we can agree on that. There is no way that a natural object or something or a natural character, a natural process, an identifiable natural process could sort of sort out the problem of identity. There is a side issue here, which however, leads to the core problem. There was a debate in the 4th century between a pagan philosopher, most probably Porphyry, and Macarius Magnes, a bishop. And in this, Porphyry, or the philosopher, called attention to a very important point. He said, the question is not who is, but who rules. So, for example, if you mentioned Odin and Zeus and other different cases when the term God is used. What I'm trying to say is that even if we grant a monotheistic God, like in the case of Aristotle, the prime mover is only concerned about itself. It doesn't exercise providence in any sense. It attracts the world, but it doesn't interfere with the world. And to some extent, it's true about the god of the Timaeus of Plato as well, because only the superstructure of the world is the care of the demiurge, and then he creates the inner cosmic young gods, and then humanity is created by the young gods and not by the demiurge. And this is a point which was raised against Christianity, that how come that the supreme deity soils his hand when in the book of Genesis takes the dust of the earth and creates Adam. So there are, even if monotheism is granted, there is a wide spectrum of possible theologies, that is, possible relationships to the realm, to the cosmos, and therefore Porphyry's point is valid. The question is who rules, that is, who exercises providence, and not just providence, but who is the lawgiver. The law, the Adamite laws in the Jewish context, and then the law of the given to Moses, and the law of Christ in the New Testament, or the law which is given by Allah. And these laws are quite different from each other. So if God is characterized by the kind of laws he or she gives, then we are we encounter the difficulty of a choice, that we follow this one or the other one, and then the law itself is not something which is empirically verifiable. Yes. Of course, it is contained in books, in the scriptures, or the New Testament, or in the Quran, but the origin of those texts is also a matter of belief, because no one was there at the Mount of Sinai and received it from God directly. So I think it's extremely difficult to say that that because we are talking about God, actually Syriac Christians also call God Allah, but maintain that God is Trinity. In Islam, it's called Allah, and it's not Trinity. These are hardly compatible ideas. And there's also obviously some kind of genetic argument here, namely that Islam was familiar with certain rather non-standard kinds of Judaism or Christianity on the Arabic Peninsula, and somehow that influenced their thought in the positive or in a negative way. That is, wanted, for example, to reject the Trinity. I'm coming up with this argument from the top of my head because it was too complex, because the Trinity caused so many divisions among Christians. So it's historically a delicate and complex issue. But because I would use the example of again a sort of kind of everyday example of the theory of relativity. Okay, now there is a fairly sort of rigid theory, physical theory. Now, if I would use the theory of relativity, let's say the special theory of relativity in a talk, then a physicist present could, although I'm talking about the same thing, but I'm wrong because and am I talking about the same thing? No, the physicist present would immediately point out that my comprehension of the mathematical background is deficient. What I'm talking about is gibberish, right? And although genetically related in a certain sense to Einstein, but in fact, I'm talking about some nonsense or gibberish.
Yeah, I think that this relates to one of the critiques that Dr. Trent Doherty came up with, that, well, if we're not referring to the same thing, then we're not having a disagreement. And I think that's an oversimplification. As you had pointed out, well, there's a way genetically that I'm referring to the theory of relativity, but I'm not. So the question then becomes kind of a meta question of, is what I'm actually talking about, the beliefs that I hold, is it actually the theory itself? But in a loose sense, obviously, and I like the term genetic, that we can talk about that. So the oversimplification was the way that language kind of works. And it's like, well, of course, we can on one hand say they're not referring to the same entity. Now that doesn't mean that it's a Bertrand Russell kind of present King of France is bald or something like that, because on the other sense, the disagreement is about whether my conception and belief system is referring about. So we can have that's what the legitimate disagreement's about. Like, is there some genetic link that I can trace back to? Well, of course, but that's not enough to say, therefore, they are referring to the same God and therefore worshiping. So I liked that point. Well, he thought this was a knockdown argument. And he used something about like, and again, he goes to the one thing that's not actually disputed to then categorically misapply to something that operates very differently. And he uses the example of, he has a friend named Jesus, and it's spelled the same way we spelled Jesus. And he has his wife's number programmed on the phone, and somebody sees that and says, Jesus doesn't have a wife. And he says, of course, there's no disagreement. As proof that we're not referring to the same entity, that's why there's no disagreement. So if there is a disagreement, conversely, we must be referring to the same entity. And again, I think two flaws. It's an oversimplification, like in these distinctions that we're making. And number two, you're using, again, empirical natural objects and saying, well, because it works like this, necessarily it must be the same with God, who's totally different, right, as far as how these things work. And I think they just they never really addressed that. But I thought that was a valid response to their critiques. And it relates to exactly what you were saying.
So it's an interesting issue I think one of the arguments in the debate was about the card game solitaire, and about somebody, okay, a child who pretends to play solitaire but doesn't play solitaire. How does it work? How can we say that she is trying to play solitaire? Because there is a common set of propositions which are common in my knowledge of solitaire and her pretending to play solitaire. For example, it is a card game. It's about it has a name. She invents certain. There are rules and so on, but then this is a limited set of common propositions, and then you sort of add all the additional rules. Just to use a simple example. What it means that if you want to learn solitaire, well, then you have to learn all the additional elements. So I think sometimes in semantic theory it is called the dossier of the name. That is what sometimes you can call it the context of a name, but I prefer the term. I think it was Gareth Evans who used the term dossier. Because the dossier implies the kind of mental complexity of most of our terms. Now, getting back for a second to the name God, Thomas Aquinas in the 13th question of the first part of the Summa very clearly says that God is a nomen communicabile, a term which can apply. It's the modal element is important, which can apply to many individuals, either in a direct sense, like for example a species, or metaphorically, when a certain property applies to I think he uses the example of the lion. You can call somebody a lion because of bravery or power or whatever. Certainly not a lion. So and then he says that the term God has only one referent, like in the case of sun. According to the astronomy of the period, there is just one sun, but there could be more suns. So it's not a proper name. It's a generic name which can be used here and there, as your example showed it, still it in the proper sense, in the strict sense, it has only one referent, but it's not its proper name. So and therefore it makes it more understandable where so many concepts of God are current.
Yeah. And I think that they try to use that therefore, when I do have a different conception, because there's only one and only one God, in that sense, that it refers and picks out, that therefore radically different conceptions or I call them minusifications. Modifications, minusifications will still refer to that, but that's not going to follow. And I think some of your syllogism actually showed that too. So we could admit in one sense, yes, it only, the term God refers to, but that doesn't mean in terms of your belief statements that therefore I will pick out that referent. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Actually, just one more word about the name of God. Aquinas himself agrees that if there would be a proper name to God, the closest to get to a proper name would be the tetragrammon, the four letters, the four-letter name. in the Old Testament, which cannot be pronounced. So, the Septuagint always writes Adonai. Instead of Adonai, writes Kyrios. So the Lord, the Lord. On the other hand, in the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, the holy name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So, why? Because another issue came about, maybe the incarnation, right? So, which is a manifestation of the divine nature in Christ. But again, I mean that would lead us in too much into theology.
Well, I noticed that some people actually use that argument that because God became man and and claimed to be God, you have a way of fixing the referent despite people saying, well, I don't believe that Christ incarnate, Christ, Jesus Christ of Nazareth is God. And they were trying to use this as an argument. Well, see, you can still he is God. You can still be referring to it. They're just wrong. And if that's basically what's going on with the Muslims is, well, they're referring to the same God. They're even worshiping. It's incorrect worship. They're just wrong about all this stuff because there is a man who is Jesus Christ, who is the God man, and that's enough to fix the referent. How would we respond to that objection? Because we're not talking about Jesus, our Hispanic or Mexican friend or something like that. Um, we are talking about there is a historical. So even when the Mormons, they're referring to the historical person Jesus Christ. The disagreement is whether he's also fully God. And so they think, well, if that's possible, and it is, to be talking about the same historical person, then obviously they're still referring to, even though they deny that he's God. That's
Well,
their
not just
argument, yeah.
deny that he's God. If I understand it well, they also deny that he was crucified. So it was actually a remnant of Docetic gnosis that it was a kind of image of Jesus on the cross. The real Jesus was laughing at the Romans believing to have crucified him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so in the same way, when we speak about a historical person, if you would say that Caesar existed, but he was defeated by Pompey. Are we talking about the same person? We are talking about the same person in the sense as the child wants to play solitaire,
Mm-hmm.
or the way I will talk about the special theory of relativity. So it's a different, despite the fact that there is a tiny common element, and that is granted, that the name Caesar, the name Pompey, that there was a conflict and so on, except that they sort of the opponent with the proposal that Pompey won the civil war turns it upside down.
Yeah. I've used this example too. I mean, look, all these guys were given examples of where it does work, in which you could have radical different conceptions and senses of something still referring to. One of the things I wanted to ask, yeah, but even among natural objects and actual historical people, isn't it possible that, in certain circumstances it doesn't? I wish I would have brought up, because I've used this example too. Have you ever heard of Aristotle? Oh yeah, the Greek. Yeah, he's a really intelligent man. And you start giving. He's from Greece. He's intelligent, had really, uh, he came from a wealthy family too. If you didn't know, Aristotle. And turns out one's thinking has never studied philosophy, and so they're thinking of Aristotle Onassis and not Aristotle Staggeria.
Yes. Sure.
So
Yeah.
even in a natural, like we could do that. It's like you change the, some of these things. You're not talking about the same person.
Yeah. For example, John loves Mary and Peter loves Mary. It doesn't follow that they love the same Mary.
Yes.
Mary is not a rigid designator.
Yes. Now, what was really interesting, I was shocked because I've never heard anybody say this. Usually they kind of concede that God operates more like a flaccid designator. I saw one philosopher come out and say, no, God is a rigid designator. And I was like, I've never even seen anybody say that. Um, I don't even know how you begin to try to argue something like that because of the examples. First of all, just the definition of the Crippian definition of rigid designator. Obviously, God doesn't operate that way. So, have you ever heard anybody try to argue that, well, no, no, God actually is a rigid designator? You see, that was a first for me. I had never even heard that.
I don't think that it was represented in theoretically, but most people in everyday discourse use it as a rigid designator.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a great point. The other thing too is that I just thought about when we were doing this stream that I don't know if I've thought about before. So Swinburne on the rational core lists eight kind of descriptions of essential descriptions of God. Now the reason why there's eight is because he takes the three monotheistic religions and finds their lowest common denominator. They would all share everything else. He says are additions or decorations or something like that. And
Yeah.
so if you have the eight, it's enough. Those are essential. It's enough to fix the referent. What I don't understand is why not take another religion? Like, why do we have to have the three monotheistic? Like, why couldn't we find another religion and be like, now there's four, let's find common attributes among them. Now it's not going to be eight, it's going to be five or four. I find it not only begging the question for just kind of arbitrary that, well, you pick the three. Like, why the three? Why not bring in a fourth or fifth and then change the number of essential kind of attributes? I think I might have asked Richard Swinburne when I delivered the paper to him, and um, I didn't get
Yeah.
a sufficient answer from him. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, historically, it's a difficult issue because I'm sure you're certainly familiar with that in the sort of the late Hellenistic Judaism, a kind of binitarianism was well argued in recent scholarship that the logos, the manifestation of the unapproachable divinity, is a kind of second divinity. Two powers in heaven. That's the most recent book about that. One. Second, as in patristic scholarship, the emergence of the concept of the Trinity, that is the when the Holy Spirit becomes a matter of debate, particularly its consubstantiality with the Father. So we know that the historically religions struggled with these very complex issues, and how to shape the best conceptualization of the revelation. So ultimately, the revelation is the origin. So it's not because Abraham contemplated
Yeah.
for a long time and then came up with the idea of God. Uh, Out of the blue came a voice, Abraham, Abraham. And in the same way, that wonderful scene in the Gospels when Jesus asked that what are people saying about me?
Hmm.
And then there are various Elijah and
John the Baptist.
prophet and so on. And what do you say, Peter? And then he come. He was an observant Jew, so it was a complete surprise. His answer.
Blessed
Um,
are you, Simon Barjona, for flesh and blood did not reveal this, but so he's,
that's right.
yeah.
That was not flesh and blood. So that is, it wasn't an empirical ascertaining of who Christ was. And in the same way, Mohammed claims to have been have been the subject of the dictation of Jibril. So this is how the Quran arrived. So that's the ideal history. Um, so I don't think that you can really. This is why I think that theism was born out in the 17th century from the shock of European intellectuals that Christian powers were waging the most brutal wars against each other
Hmm.
on the issues of how to understand the scriptures. So the Protestant powers and the Catholic powers.
With the 30-year war.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and then it was a kind of reaction to consider the sort of additional elements beyond the core doctrine as a kind of historical accretion
Hmm.
can be safely discarded. And then let's keep to the essence. But keeping to the essence means that you talk again. Everyday discourse is about God, even among Christians, and not about the Trinity. Although the Trinity makes them Christians, not not
Yeah.
not not
Yeah.
just
Not,
God.
yeah. Great point. Another aspect too that I didn't get to I had so many arguments that I wanted to get to, but you responded to other stuff and I didn't get to. But it's a good argument that you in your paper even make too. I think it's number 8. The common core or the rational core is that not only is this God the creator and sustainer and all the omnis, he demands allegiance. So this specifically ties into the question of worship.
Yeah,
Now, worship demands allegiance. God says, I'm a jealous God. You shall have no other gods before me. He
yeah,
demands, one of the aspects. And Islam and Jews all have this number 8. Um, and what's interesting is that itself excludes all other conceptions of God. It's like saying, um, I'm allegiant to two armies that are set against each other. And I just find their commonalities, and can I be referring and to the same army by finding a list of 8 commonalities between the two opposing armies? Well, no, not when one of them, right? If number 8 is a necessary condition for establishing the reference, and that is uh, the God who demands allegiance in the worship, then it naturally and logically excludes the other. And I wish I would have
yeah.
brought that up, but I think you talk about that in your paper, and that's a great argument.
So not yeah. Um, I think there are two important counter arguments
Okay.
to my paper, or rather warnings. One is that the conjunct theory carries the difficulty of what happens, for example, between Orthodox and Catholic, or Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant, because the conjuncts look differently to some extent. But since we agreed that even changing one element changes the truth value, therefore, if one is true, then the other is not. Here, I think that somehow this has to be not first regulated. Second, there has to be a hierarchy. That what are the really important points and what are the less important points. I wasn't addressing that issue, but for example, when the Patriarch Mark Carolarius received the letter from Peter of Alexandria, because the Patriarch of Constantinople sent a long list of the errors of the Latins, to which the Patriarch Peter of Alexandria answered, hang on, there are important issues and the less important issues. Okay, let's not get into the details. The important thing is that he suggested that there is a hierarchy of these elements. For example, whether the priests have beards or not, that's a local issue. That's not something which you. So that's an important issue, and here obviously the theory gets fuzzy at the edges. So which are the important points and which not?
Yeah, let me make a comment about that real quick, because I've noticed this among my students too. One of the things, and I can't remember where it is in Aristotle, where he's saying, look, if something's unclear, it's obscure, you don't go to the more obscure, more fuzzy. You go to something that's clear.
Yeah.
And I find in a lot of these kind of objections, when we're talking about, well, what's at hand, what's the issue you're discussing, it's whether Muslims and Christians worship or refer to the same God. Why would you go to areas that are blurry and fuzzy, that are a lot more confusing? One of the examples that I see people do all the time is that, so what happens to the Roman Catholics after 1054, and the excommunications? Are they all so people who don't know? And I'm like, well, it's just kind of weird that there's this notion that at that minute, right, this kind of discrete, everybody on this side of the timeline is in, but out. There's a kind of blur. And I mean, we're obviously, even when we mark the date 1054, it's not an essential date, that it's, we're marking that just to kind of give a general historical mark between, but people go to this area. It's like, well, that's fun. Like, I don't, it's clear. I mean, shouldn't we go now and look at, after Vatican II? Yeah, but does it look like the first millennium? Like, I don't know. I'm not God. I don't know, when somebody's, part of the church and versus out on this. This came up recently when I was teaching logic. We were doing inductive arguments and identifying whether inductive argument's strong or weak. And one of the students asked me a really interesting question. She was like, well, what's the mechanism by which you know that it's strong or weak? And I'm like, oh, that's an interesting question.
Yes, that's a very good question.
She was like, what's the formula or principle? And of course, she was a STEM student, so she thought very much in kind of a analytic, left brain, quantitative. And I said, well, I mean, intuitively, can't you just tell at the extremes? And that's where I like to start. Look at this inductive argument and look at this. Obviously, generally speaking, it's this the premises are not strong enough to support that the conclusion's probable. Um, you're gonna get me in an area that in the middle, then it's like fuzzy. I'm like, I don't know. There's cases, but don't we start out here with what's more clear? We don't go to the fuzzy areas, and this is a charitable, thing for the Roman Catholics and the Protestants. Do I have to, in order for me to say that and develop a philosophical argument that Muslims and Christians don't worship the same God, I don't have to get into every kind of convoluted, fuzzy, obscure detail about Catholics and Protestants. So I think that mindset's a mistake.
Yeah. Whether that would be my imagination of a second counter argument that would this argument draw too sharp of a line
Mm.
between the opponents? However, I think that once a friend asked me quite similarly to your student that what is a deep problem as opposed to a shallow problem? Uh, and the best answer I could come up with was that um, a deep problem is such a problem which leads to other deep problems. Uh, Therefore, if you begin a debate about um, sorry, it's not personal, about the beards of priests, then you will sooner or later become very boring. It's not a serious issue.
Yeah.
However, whether uh, whether God's only begotten Son is consubstantial with the Father or not, that's a serious problem
Yes.
because that leads to very sort of other deep problems about temporality, logical priority versus temporality, about what is a substance, and so on and so on. As we all know that there were serious issues coming from that. So I think a strong argument. Actually, Aristotle makes a distinction because there are syllogisms and enthymemes.
Yes.
That is missing a minor premise. Arguments missing a minor premise. So there are different kinds of rhetorical arguments are not meant to be sort of absolutely valid.
Also, I think
Um,
there's probably a mistake too that in some of these questions that there's only kind of one type of definition. Um, and as you see, if you study logic, that, well, there are definitions by genus and species, there's lexical definitions. There's also ostensible definitions that I point at it. Like, well, what is it? Well, that thing right there.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I think something's kind of they're asking areas that I need to have the necessary conditions left out, listed out for what a deep problem is versus. But there's a level of kind of you know it being ostensible. It's like that because it goes to that stuff over there and that, and it doesn't. And I think that's perfectly fine to do that, to think that way, to be like, well, there's different ways we signify stuff and define stuff. There's not one, definition to fit them all, to rule them all.
yeah. Yeah, that's right. But yeah, and this leads to the sort of the political aspect of the argument, namely that if you maintain, and this can be brought up against this approach, namely that the Muslims and Christians worshipping not just differently God, but their whole conception of God is different. You could say that well, what can we do? The theist would say that there are the essential properties, and they agree on that. Well, actually, historically, the selection of Swinburne's requirements are questionable because Avicenna's conception of creation is very different from Aquinas, but Maimonides. However, the theist approach is an external approach, and as if two people are debating with each other, because for Christians, the Muslims are unbelievers, especially in the Middle Ages, and from the Muslim point of view, they are kafir, that is, pagans basically, or unbelievers. So there comes the theist and wants to make peace by sort of cutting down both religions to the basics. And that doesn't work because this is not what they believe in. Now, what can happen is that a religious community revises the various elements, and this is why I think the concept of hierarchy is important. That discarding the less important elements and see whether it can accommodate, not come to the same position, but accommodate the existence of the other. A beautiful example for this is the religious philosophy of Franz Rosenzweig, for who sort of accepted the revelation's two branches, Christianity and Islam. Sorry, sorry. Christianity and Judaism. What he says about Islam is very different. So there are ways, and of course there are schools within Judaism which reject Rosenzweig, but he was still, a very powerful force in 20th century Judaism. So these are, there are possibilities of accommodation, not accepting the.
Yeah, politically speaking, yeah. In terms of political, it'd be interesting too. I've got a great. Where is it? It's a big. Oh, here. This is great. The history of the Byzantine state too. Obviously.
Oh yes, the Ostrogorsky story. Yeah. I know that. Yeah.
Great book too, and just see when the Byzantine state, or kind of various models and just historical events in which they did accommodate and allow, a second kind of tier citizenship of different other religions. And there were obviously a lot of peaceful times in which that was allowed. So, I mean, obviously as Orthodox, we'd probably look to something about how the history of the Byzantine state dealt with these issues. Now, somebody outside who's Protestant or something like that, like, I don't know how they would try to deal with this other than kind of what we were seeing. Let's see. Let me just check real quick. There was something else I wanted to ask you. I'm trying to remember. Anyways, go ahead. It'll come to me. In a sec. It was something about. Oh, I remember. When you mentioned that, was it Alvaro's or Avicenna's conception of creation was quite different?
From Aquinas.
Yes.
Or Maimonides.
That made me think about, well, one of the problems with the rational core is it assumes that there's a common kind of meaning to all of those terms.
Yes.
Creator, uh, uh, let's, for example, um, omnipresence. If you look at Islam, there's different schools where they believe that Allah is not present in evil places,
Yep.
like a kind of Manichaean kind of conception. Um, and you actually have, Muslims will go and do immoral things there because God's not present and doesn't see. So, well, wait a minute. Then obviously omnipresence means something totally different in that religion than Christianity. So that's one of the problems with the rational core too. It already assumes that all those terms and the 8 kind of points there all mean the same thing among us.
I completely agree. I think the historically, if you look at the interpretation or the meaning of those terms, then you will see how differently these were understood by the various theologians. So, for example, the Tzimtzum of the Kabbalah, that God withdraws into himself and thereby creates the space for the world, for the cosmos. That's not the same as Aquinas or the sort of the classic idea, for example, in Basil's Hexaemeron about the creation, the ex nihilo. These are I was when I'm teaching classes about philosophy of religion, one of the things I try to explain to them that there are innumerable books entitled creation myth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then a creation myth is, for example, the American Indian creation, when there's the sea, the 4 ducks, and the old man coyote, and then the ducks go down, and the fourth one brings up some mud, and that is dried and blown around. So, how many agents are there? 4 ducks, the sea, old man coyote, and the mud. All right, at least 7 actors, or even the Mesopotamian myths, Marduk and Tiamat. There are 2 of them, and they have the swords, and they are cutting each other, and there is blood, and there is the sea once again. Uh, the Timaeus, which has a 3-principled creation. There is the demiurge, the ideas, and the receptacle. So the
Mm-hmm.
demiurge looks at the idea and imprints them. That's not ex nihilo. That's not the. So all I'm trying to say is not that one is better than the other. I'm just saying that let's realize that these are talking about the origin of the world in very different terms.
Yes. Yeah. Great point. And another objection that has been going around lately is that Saint John Damascus calls the Muslim Islam a Christian heresy. So they obviously just got things wrong, but they're still referring to and worshiping incorrectly the same God. Now, I find that troublesome. First of all, because you're already assuming what you want to prove um, that the referent would be the same. Number two, I think St. John of Damascus is using the term heresy loosely, not in a technical. These were members that were part of the body that is the visible institution of the church and departed. I think what he means is genetically they were borrowing from Christian heretics. They had an
Oh yeah.
encounter. Um, so that's a really kind of strange argument that's been kind of making the rounds that, well, obviously they're referring to because St. John of Damascus says that Islam's a Christian heresy. Your thoughts on that?
Well, he calls them Aryans, in fact, and a radical form of Arianism. Well, how would you explain to your flock the emergence of this radically opposing religion? Which opposes Christianity. You have to explain it in a way. And I
Yes.
think you are quite right saying in that he uses the term heresy in a loose sense uh, in order to sort of it was a kind of how to put it, if you look at the world with the expectation of rationality, you want to explain what happens. You have to use the conceptual toolbox you are
Yes.
provided with. So I think the emergence of Islam as something completely new, it requires an explanation. So how would you explain it? I think you try to sort of classify it somehow on the fringes of the universal claim of Christianity.
Yes.
So
Yeah, great point. That's a great point. I hadn't approached it from that. The other thing too is, and this kind of gets into something we just, I brought up in the debate, but also that we discussed before the stream, is that in terms of being mystically united in baptism in a visible and mystical body of Christ that is the church, and part of that is the kataholos, all the parts, the icons, the liturgy, the psalms, the hierarchy, the people, the sacraments, that this guarantees and directs our worship. Because people ask, well, what if somebody else, in the church believes, some heretical thing? Are they not worshiping? Well, no, it's still now how God receives their hearts and what he does with somebody, even in the church, only God knows. But what we can say is that no, the visible and mystical body of the church with all the parts um, conditions the worship in the words to refer to the one true God. And if we don't say that, then we're in a realm of donatism. That at any one time, I might think something wrong or do something wrong, and it no longer refers to the same God. I mean, obviously, a child doesn't have a Nicene understanding of God and the Trinity, yet their worship is offered and directed to the one true God. Now, once you're excommunicated, once you, in the technical sense of being a heretic, there's nothing to. It might be possible, and I think I kind of said that. It might be possible. Like, I mean, I don't. I'd have to kind of see the details. The proof's kind of in the details. But what I can say, there is no longer that body that protects against the error, and so I can't say that. I can certainly say that. Well, when you get so far out in the extremes, that's not referring to the same God, and I think we should focus on that. And I wanted to make a distinction that I didn't get to bring up in the debate. Um, it's not really present. Um, I did find a little bit. I forget who it was that there was a Roman Catholic philosopher that did refer to the heart and things like this. So it might be close to kind of the nous. Um, in orthodoxy, but I mean, obviously, our anthropology is very different, and we have these kind of tripartite kind of soul of, the part of the soul that animates and guides the senses in the body, the rational, the intellectum, um, and then the eyes of the heart, the kind of what the fathers talk about, the nous. And St. Paul says that, he talks about that all know God. So in one sense, there is a reference that his internal powers and divine nature, his invisible qualities, have been clearly seen in creation, such that all are without excuse. Now, I find it interesting. He doesn't say, well, only Aristotelians who do these kind of deductive a posteriori arguments to a generic God or without excuse. He says everybody. I would assume that includes children too. So it's not just Dionia, discursive kind of reasoning that St. Paul's talking about. He's talking about the heart. And
Yep.
St. Paul talks about the law being written on the hearts of men, and but that men suppress that through acts of unrighteousness, which can also, I imagine, be words and philosophies and thoughts, that they suppress that knowledge. And so I wanted to make an important distinction that somebody could refer in their heart because all people know God. I don't have access to that. That's above my pay grade. I don't know if the worship and God can see that. All I'm given is the public language, third person kind of language of a system or religion, and say, does this in itself refer to, well, when you get out in these extremes, obviously not. And so there's a way that I could say that, yes, they could. A pagan, a Jew, like, I don't know. I can't answer that. All I have to go on is the words and language and rules of the religion. Anyways, thoughts on that?
Well, I think you mentioned it before that, for example, the participation in the what does the church mean? The church means participating in the liturgy, in the Eucharist, in the Psalms, and it all, in a certain sense, regulates the
Yes.
or gives a structure to what Judaism or Christianity or Islam is about. So and you can't divest either Judaism or Christianity or Islam from these liturgical, practical elements. You can't say that there is a core doctrine and then the rest. Well, yeah, obviously there is a hierarchy because, for example, there is historical development, historical changes, not development, but historical, emerging historical changes, and forms of, the Wahhabite Salafite interpretation of Islam is relatively late, although there were radical movements before that as well, or in Christianity, the history of dogma shows that, yes, there were important changes in certain respects. For example, in the case of the beatific vision in the mid 14th century, or the Hesychos debate in Byzantium. So yes, and the reform in the 16th century in Europe. So it's a very complex sort of issue, but in some way, even the changing shape of the church, one thing is important, namely that the sacraments and the Eucharist remains, and then the hymnography changes and issues change. And here comes in what I call the hierarchy of meaning. So there are changes which are very important, and um, so for example, the addition of the Trisagion to the liturgy, or other elements, the Franciscan type of spirituality, and so on. But the core, there is a core. This is what I'm trying to say, and that is absolutely necessary to maintain this an order in the mental content of what, for example, Christianity is about.
Do you know what's interesting about that, though? The core that you just referenced there is very different than Richard Swinburne's rational core.
Yes,
One is
yes,
actually
absolutely different.
historical. This is actually a tototia there, right? Happening, uh, and a visible body, and again, you know, uh, through divine revelation to an interaction with the living God, who promises that he will be with us until the end of ages. It's so I'm just bringing this up because I can anticipate an objection. Oh, we got you. See, you have an essential core too. It's like, well, those are very different categories. How something, how the living God is working with his people historically versus sitting in an armchair speculating about lowest common denominator essential properties,
No,
right?
no, no. Yeah. It's very different because it includes the icons, it includes the liturgical actions, the gestures, all sorts of elements which are which are not rational core elements. They are liturgical core elements, if you wish, in a wide sense. So all the things you mentioned, namely the sacraments, the hierarchy, and so on. Now, obviously, you can have the not very sympathetic outgrowth of clericalism or lots of things. I studied recently a book for in Latin, medieval book for priests, the Stella Clericorum, the star of the clerics, which claimed that the hands of the priests, which hold the host, the transubstantiated host, they entertain the body of Christ much longer than because Christ was in the womb of the Mother of God only for 9 months, while in the hands of the priest, it,
Oh wow, that's
it's brutal, and it had some innumerable re-editions, and
they're elevating the priests above the
yeah,
Theotokos.
you can find quite a few of the manuscripts online as well. And if you so it's a there are strange outgrowths of this, no question about that. But still, a kind of, and well, this is what is entrusted in a certain sense to our responsibility to the Spirit. Um, it's uh, the gates of hell will hopefully not prevail.
Yeah, yeah. Um, it's in a similar way talking about that there is in terms of the visible and mystical body of the church. This comes up a lot with arguments that I have with Protestants, whether it's determining the canon or some type of dogmatic issue, and um, I think because they argue with Roman Catholics a lot, they think this is kind of a mechanical clericalism or something. Oh, the church just says, and that's what makes it. And it's like, well, that's not that's not our position. And one of the things that's kind of related to this, I like to lay out as far as, well, there certainly is a hierarchy. Certainly, what I would say necessary conditions, um, and that is liturgy. So when we look to the canonization, or even like dogmatic issues, um, the liturgy and history, the Psalms, um, the the fathers, the fact that we do have uh, an episcopacy and synodality, that there's that's a necessary condition too. I would say iconography too, the use of icons
Yeah.
in determining kind of dogmatic things. Now, suppose, and I don't even know what the number is, but suppose they were actually eight. Suppose there were eight for orthodoxy, um, that then taken together served as a kind of necessary and sufficient condition for justifying, well, this is the scripture, or this is the dogmatic issue. What that means then is, like the conjunct, if I change anyone, if, like, well, I don't believe in a normative authority, kind of legal authority, I don't believe in synodality or the episcopacy, then, well, then you don't have justification for these issues. It's a game changer, right? Is that
Yep.
it's the kataholos. Those are at least the necessary conditions. So, I may say to a Protestant, because I was a Protestant, um, I didn't have to become Orthodox to know stuff, um, in one sense, but because I didn't have the whole, a lot of the stuff that I got correct, and I did, stuff that I obviously didn't change, about the Trinity and the Incarnation. Um, I wasn't an iconoclast, so I didn't have to have that problem. In some sense, is accidental because I'm lacking all the kind of conditions where it's like, well, it's kind of like it's a doxa, it's a true belief, but without ultimate kind of justification for.
Yeah.
And I think that's important in terms of, like, talking about, there is definitely a core that serves to be a justification for all of these matters, not only referring to the true God, but our justification for the canon of Scripture, the various you know doctrinal controversies in which the church ruled. Um, Obviously, the ecumenical councils wasn't just a bunch of patriarchs going, well, we just arbitrarily decided it, so it's true. As you can see from robber councils, right? Like, that doesn't work. That's not how the church. So there's a really kind of, from the outside, there's a really kind of different way of thinking about it that I think people really struggle with, to kind of understand these things in orthodoxy, like how orthodoxy actually works. I had one of the funny, I made a funny joke about this. Roman Catholics get really confused, and not all of them. Like, I tell people, I'm like, I never hear my colleagues, I work at a Roman Catholic college with Roman Catholic philosophers and theologians. I'm like, I've never heard them give these arguments. So I don't know if they're coming from teenagers online or where this is coming from. But one of the big ones is, well, your patriarchs disagree. How do you know which one's right? And I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's just, I don't know, like, use your mind. And I mean, what if they disagreed about a math problem? We got two patriarchs disagree. Stop me if you've heard this one. Two patriarchs walk into a bar and they're having a disagreement about the answer to a math problem, and then the Roman Catholic walks in and be like, "How are we gonna figure this out without a pope?" So I told them, like, well, you use your mind. You have to look at, like, all the things that I talked about. Like, you have to look at the history, the liturgy, the doctrines. You've got to use your mind. And accuse me of being a Protestant, and I'm like, wait a minute, is that the argument? Using your mind is now Protestant?
No. Well, that's a good point. Story. Actually, patriarchs happen to disagree.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's not
So,
anything historically new.
Yeah, they did, and again, I mean, there is this nice book by Tia Korbaba on the errors of the Latins, in which she shows how the priorities changed over time. So it wasn't always the filioque. Sometimes it was the azima. Sometimes it was the epiclesis,
Yes.
and so on. So and the priorities fluctuated. For example, today I don't think that except very hardcore theologians would begin to argue about the filioque. Right? We know the history. We know that there were different interpretations of this, even within Orthodoxy and within Catholicism as well. For example, Duns Scotus, a leading Latin theologian, said that had the church not decided this way, the Greeks would have had a point. So,
Yeah.
so, uh, so it's a, but then there are the sort of this is what I'm trying to say, that although this long conjunct is I think a good approach how to conceive of the character of Christianity or Islam. It is becoming fuzzier towards the edges,
Yes.
and and then historically and so on. And now, how do you decide? Well, I've never been a patriarch in debate with another, but I can imagine that under a certain responsibility and pressure and understanding of what the church thinks about it, because they are not isolated individuals. They are talking to their clergy. They're talking to clergy, is talking to the people. They are talking to the people, and so on. So there is a kind of emergent, uh, and of course you have to assign some role to the Holy Spirit as well.
Yes. Yes. I mean, one of the reasons why this came up is because Patriarch Bartholomew, the ecumenical patriarch, and Patriarch Kirill, they dug up statements about them both saying that Muslims and Christians worship the same God. Now, the big problem that they're ignoring too, in some sense, they act as, similar to heads of states. Um, at least Patriarch Kirill, and there's a large Islamic presence in Russia. That's something that you know he has to be diplomatic about. I don't know exactly what exactly he believes on that. I know that when he gives statements like that, that they're political diplomatic statements because of conflicts that they've had in Russia. Not to mention um, the yoke that the Islamic yoke that the ecumenical patriarch's under. That makes sense that he would say something like that. So you have to keep in mind that if a patriarch says something, um, there might be a kind of larger context, a diplomatic context or something that doesn't mean it's dogma. And furthermore, um, patriarchs don't declare dogma. They're accountable to their own synod, right? It's
Only an
synods that,
ecumenical council
yeah, or ecumenical
um,
count, like those are the things that discuss dogma. So, they thought this was a gotcha. Well, you're ignoring your own patriarchs, and I'm like, look, if my patriarch gets a wrong math on something on mathematics, like I'm not bound to his personal opinion. Mathematical theologumena next week. We'll talk about. Um, so again, it's an incorrect understanding of these issues, and particularly how um, one methodology and one system is not the same as the other. So it's really unfair, intellectually dishonest in some sense to go, well, this is the way that we determine. It would be like equivalent of me going into I don't know, Britain like parliamentary and based off a kind of common law and be like, well, no, that's not how it works. You see, you have to follow U.S. the way that U.S. works on in terms of the legal structure. And you're wrong because you don't follow that's not how it works. In different systems and religions, they have different rules and mechanisms how to determine these things. So you can't really set up a straw man and say, well, look how you failed because you don't fit the arbitrary criteria that we hold to. That's a big issue. And maybe that's part of the issue too we were talking about with the rational core is just this assumption that, well, we all just have the same kind of presuppositions and philosophically and the same meaning of words. And so, what does Aquinas say? A small error in the beginning becomes a big error
Yeah.
later.
A small error in the beginning becomes a big error at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. It's like, well, I mean, you see this all throughout philosophy, right? It's like, oh, how did this guy get to say something so bizarre? And just what's like, well, you could trace it back historically to something that seemed kind of subtle and not that big of a mistake. Um, and it's one of the things that I encourage everybody in the audience. One of the great things about studying the history of philosophy is it trains you to be able to identify these things are not just happy accidents that somebody just randomly comes up with, you know, errors and different stuff. It's because there's smaller errors from other people that weren't identified that become much larger later on. And you get a real appreciation of that from studying history and the history of philosophy, I think. All right, I don't want to keep you too long. I want to ask just real quick if anybody in the chat has any questions or anything you want to end with, and then about the debate or anything that you noticed, and then we'll take a few questions and then we'll depart in peace, if that's okay with you.
Yep, fine.
Any other final thoughts on the kind of debate and the strengths of the opponent's arguments, some of the weaknesses?
Well, as I try to say, I mean, what I did was I tried to analyze the belief, religious belief statement from the point of view of intentionality and intentional logic. It's for example, the last phase of our discussion, which you explained, and I agree that there are political issues involved, like being under Muslim rule. Or the sensitivity in Russia towards the Muslim minority, occasionally majority in certain parts. So that's a valid, if necessary, or rather necessary point. So I don't want to sort of criticize that. What I'm saying is that if we look at the nature of how our "I believe in" type sentences work, these are the problems we are going to encounter, and then if we specify that mental content in which characterizes which is our belief, then we have to realize that this is not a minimum of some rational core issues, but a very large, long set of various elements which jointly characterize our religious convictions. And it's not enough to have the theist minimum, because that just does not live up to what religions are functionally.
I
So
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
yeah, and as to the counter arguments, I think you pointed out in the debate very well that the natural objects or natural processes, which especially natural theology, taken for granted. I don't really, I'm not a great fan of natural theology.
Hmm.
I wrote articles and studied these arguments from
Answers,
Anselm,
yeah.
getting tired. From Anselm of Canterbury, it's also in English if you want to have some fun. It's what I pinched the title from Lewis Carroll. The title of my article is that what Gaunilo and Anselm told each other, because I think that the only really valid criticism of Anselm's argument, which I think is not an ontological argument, this
I
is
don't
what I
think it
try to.
is either. Yeah, I wrote my
It's
bachelor's thesis on this actually, so
all
I'm
right.
really,
Okay.
yeah, I'm
Okay.
really
So kind
interested,
of
and I
point.
argued it wasn't ontological, so it's interesting
Because
that
there is people forget that there is an empirical premise in the argument, namely that the fool says in his heart,
yeah. Well,
and
not only that
Schopenhauer.
too. Remember, he wrote the
Yep.
monologian before the prosologian. He
Yeah. 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 Sure.
bases the
Yeah.
prosologian off the monologian, and I think you really get in more of an empirical basis in the monologian. It's much clearer.
So, but anyway,
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
the important thing in these arguments is always the unicity problem. So the five ways of Aquinas, even if we grant that they lead to the existence of a prime mover, it doesn't secure the unicity of the prime mover.
Yeah.
It proves that there is at least one prime mover, but it
Yes.
doesn't show that there is at most one. So anyway,
There's another
anyways,
argument I thought too that I came up with a couple years ago. It's in the objection that he raises that I actually think is a really good objection. I don't think his response is good, but he says between two terms, infinite and finite, there is no mean proportion. Um, and therefore we can't prove the existence of God. And I'm like, actually, that's a really good objection. And then the response is terrible. It's just like, well, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just, uh, well, wait a minute. You have two opposite categories, right? Infinite being and finite condition circumscribed being. And this comes up in philosophy all the time of how to like the incommensurability of like opposite categories. And so just to say, well, there's just an imperfect mean, well, that's exactly what's in question. And so if that's true, then we can't reason causally through a chain of cause and effects to the first cause. That's implicit in his objection itself. Um, for Orthodox, obviously the mean proportion is the divine energies. That not only is God, transcendent, he's immanent in the world and fills all things. So, anyways, just a side note, but
yeah, sure, yeah.
it's a type of criticism of natural theology that I could start from. And remember how natural theology is defined. I mean, we have a type of natural theology. We would call it natural revelation, but the way that in Roman Catholicism is defined, and going back to Aquinas, is what the human mind by the natural light of reason alone can know about God, apart from divine revelation. Obviously, Orthodox would say, well, everything's divine revelation.
Yes, yes, that's right.
Like, so we don't accept that premise. Anyways, just want to make a few comments on that. Other thoughts, closing thoughts. Any questions in there? Somebody had a question about, were you Orthodox when you wrote Theistic Fallacies. They had a question.
Oh, yes, I was. Yeah.
Yeah. Other questions?
But it has nothing to do with my orthodoxy. Probably the examples I relied on, for example, on the liturgy or whatever, those I only take as examples and not as any. I don't want this issue to become a matter of confessional
Yeah.
debate or whatever. My intention is that it's pure logic.
Oh, I had a question for you.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
so it's interesting that the hooded man paradox, that Dr. Trent Doherty and used that as an argument in favor of that they are referring to the same thing, despite, right, the man that you don't know is the hooded man is your father. Uh, but that's the opposite take of what you're talking about in terms of Berlin conditions. Do you see what I'm saying? He took it an opposite way, and you used in your papers to actually show their mistake. That the hooded man paradox reveals, well, yes, it's ignoring the special semantic and logical behavior of beliefs and belief statements and how they condition. Anyways, I just found it interesting that he was like, well, the hooded man proves my case. And I was like, I don't think hooded man refutes you. Anyways,
Well,
yeah.
the difference is that the hooded man paradox, that is, a hooded man is coming, who is John's father. John doesn't realize that the father, because the person is hooded. So you don't know the person. The person coming, but the person coming is your father. Therefore, you don't know your father.
Mm-hmm.
Here, the important element is that you don't know, because to know or to believe behave logically similarly. So the and the Burley, Walter Burley, the English logician, he stipulates the requirement that in order to say that Cicero is running and Tully is running, you can only infer from Cicero is running that Tully is running if you have background information that Tully is identical to Cicero.
Yeah.
So, and for example, the answer to the hooded man paradox is that if you know that you saw your father putting on the hood on his head, then of course you would know who is coming.
Yeah. And that
So
goes to the point. It's that addresses the Superman and Clark Kent analogies too. That it
that's
all
right.
begs the question that you have the background information to actually determine you're in an epistemically privileged. What do I call it? You are the epistemic cosmic exile, looking down, being like, "Oh, there it is."
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, which is exactly what's in question. That doesn't work with God. So, somebody did have a question about that. Any last questions? Anybody in the chat? Because I know it's getting late over in your time zone, and I want to thank you so much for again all your work and for this and kind of going over kind of some of the details of I will make one last point. I have a colleague. He's a Orthodox philosophy professor in Wayne State, and he said, "Isn't it interesting?" He says, "You know, because he's an analytic philosopher. He is also a philosophy of religion professor at Wayne State, and he says." Semantic theories and theories of reference are some of the most difficult philosophy out there. Um, And isn't it interesting your opponents have to hinge their entire argument on literally some of the most difficult philosophers? I'm like, that's a good point. Now, you and I obviously like went to school and learned a lot of this stuff, and um, we can dance and do that. But I knew in that debate that I'm like, most people aren't gonna understand these theories. It's gonna be over their heads, and it really was. But I think people, certainly you saw from like the vote, even from Roman Catholic, I think people that's why I'm going to take it back to the intuition. People intuitively know that Muslims and Christians don't worship the same God. So then how do you get people away from their intuition? Well, you bring in a bunch of philosophers that make this elaborate kind of smoke and mirrors of look at my words and argument.
Yeah.
don't don't actually look at the reality of the situation and what you intuitively know. Look at this beautiful theory that I made that nobody can actually understand. So there's kind of a magic trick in some sense, and philosophers are kind of notorious for kind of doing that. I often tell my students, just as a pedagogical, just fun. Imagine the
Well,
philosophers we're reading are really smart con artists trying to sell you a bad product, and you have to use your detective skills to figure out where the con is. It
no, no,
helps if yeah.
I'm sort of I think I'm a little bit of, too old school because I very much like the Aristotelian dictum that that clarity is the virtue of writing. So I'm not part of that that secret language of analytic philosophy. I did analytic philosophy for a while, but then I sort of got somewhat disappointed that we
Yeah.
are not discussing the really important issues.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but this is how I sort of liberated myself a little bit, uh, and um, and my early Thomistic readings also received a correction when I began to read under the guise of my supervisor, or rather inspiring teacher, the Church Fathers. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
anyway,
Um, all right, let's see. I'm just gonna take a couple questions and then we'll depart. If I become aware of Orthodox, should I stress theological difference and become a priest or just live as a righteous Catholic? Well, obviously you got like we're gonna encourage you to become Orthodox. Uh, the priesthood's a calling, and it's I think people should be made aware of how difficult and the kind of psychologically and spiritually demanding it is. People think it's in Orthodoxy, you know, we don't have like a kind of career move up the ladder kind of mentality that God uses all of us where we're at. And although we have hierarchy, the dignity of each office that we hold in the church is equal dignity. Again, we don't have kind of a corporate climb the ladder. Um, and people should be made aware of you're not a better Christian because you become a priest. You're not doing orthodoxy better if and you should be aware of the extreme demand and difficulties of the priesthood. It's not for everybody. And so, good
Bishop
question.
Bishop Callistus Ware, with whom I had a few, I was had the great grace of having talked to him. And at some point he explained exactly this, what you say, that in Orthodoxy there is no vocation, priestly vocation, and that's a different way
Yeah.
of learning and studying and getting into the priesthood.
Yeah, people come in, obviously we do philosophy. That's just our gift that we've been given, and we offer that to God in thanksgiving. And then people go, obviously they follow your work and be like, well, do I have to learn all this stuff to become Orthodox? And I'm always like, well, no. I mean, look at the church. We have wonderful cooks, people who bake prosphora, wonderful singers. That would be like asking you come into the meal and like, this is amazing. Do I have to become a professional cook to become Orthodox? Do I have to be a priest or get like? It's like, well, we're all, we're all part of the church. Like, there's no one that's more dignified than the other, and we need all of each other. So uh, I think that, but definitely, uh, you know, we call all to come into the church and receive healing and um, not stay outside of the ark. So definitely convert to Orthodoxy, come into the ark, and be healed. And let's see. I think that is it. Um, does analytic philosophy introduce confusion? That's a
I'm
great
sorry, does analytic
philosophy introduce confusion. That's a great question.
uh, anything can introduce confusion if you are not using it well. I mean, you can introduce confusion in soccer if you are not if the team is not playing well. And yeah, it's never the tool. It's always the hand which uses the tool.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
So,
the good thing about analytic philosophy is that it became concerned with kind of, should I put, good philosophical hygiene, um, that clarity itself and being, especially in terms of language,
yeah,
and logic, that being very precise. And as you'd brought up, now, depending on who you are and the context, the downside of that though is, something I used this in a paper once. I said people can miss the epistemic forest for the epistemic trees.
hmm.
You can get too bogged down in details, and it's like the house is on fire. Yeah, but look at, what about my modal operator right here? It's like the house is on fire. Yeah, but what about this? How does designation work in this situation here? Is this an a posteriori necessity that's cryptic? The house is on fire. You gotta get out of the house. Um,
Well,
I think
uh,
that happens sometimes in analytic philosophy. Is you miss kind of bigger, kind of more important questions because you're getting bogged down in the details, um, uh, of various things.
there is the old Greek story about Thales, who is watching the stars and then falls into the
Falls
pit.
into the
And
volcano. The
well, on the one hand, it shows how ridiculous it is to deal only with the stars. On the other hand, the maid's laughter is also a little bit mean because the maid doesn't. The maid knows about the pit, but knows nothing about the stars.
It can be worse though. You could throw yourself into a volcano because you think you're a god.
Sure, sure. No, that's yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's the other ways that the pre-Socratics went wrong. One wasn't paying attention, was looking at the stars and fell into a pit. The other one actually thought he was a god and threw himself into a volcano. Um,
Yeah.
uh, I guess Archimedes isn't a pre-Socratic, but you could be like, and another man that just wouldn't take baths. That's actually a really great. If you had to make a popular like philosophy series, that would be actually a great way to kind of start it.
Experimental issue.
Yeah. Well, God bless you. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Dr. Geréby. Look forward to seeing more of your work. And we just can't thank you enough for joining us for this stream. And
And thank you so much for the invitation. It was
abs-
a really, really interesting discussion for me, and getting involved into these issues and your podcast. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. Until next time, God bless everybody.
God bless.
Okay, we are done. Thank you